I'll show you how to make 11 miniature plants that are small enough to work in 1/24 scale as well as 1/12 scale. I'll use simple methods and materials to make these handmade minis. I'm painting paper I'll be using for some of my leaves. I want the colors to blend with one another, so I'm wetting the paper before adding the paint. I'm using a flat wide brush and picking up a couple colors at the same time. I'm painting in a herringbone pattern and not cleaning my brush between colors. I am hoping the different colors and textures will imitate the veins of leaves. I painted and sealed the front and back. For the first plant, I'm cutting tapered leaves that come to a point and are wider at the base. I'm cutting these long leaves for a Dracaena plant, but you'll see this is a versatile shape. If you make straight cuts into the paper, you'll end up with these rectangular strips. To create this taper, I'm turning my scissors slightly to cut very long, skinny triangles out between each leaf. You can fold the paper in half and even thirds to cut more of these little points at once. When you do something like this, pay attention but don't be obsessive, because not every leaf will turn out perfectly, and that is just fine. I'm using Q-tips for the stem of the Dracaena. I'm adding a bend at the end of this paper Q-tip and coloring it brown with a marker. The Q-tip is really smooth, so I'm adding a fish scale-like texture using my craft knife. Since this Q-tip is made from tightly rolled paper, it cuts easily. I added the greenery by wrapping it around the top of each of the 3 Q-tip branches. I attached a shorter curved branch to the right and left of the central Q-tip for a total of 3 branches. To minimize the glue mess, I'm putting the Q-tip trunk through the bead hole and adding the glue to the bottom. Then when I pull the Q-tip up, the glue is stuck inside and not on top of the bead. I didn't like the transition between the Q-tip and the paper, so I'm blending it in with some brown paint. I emphasized the texture by dry brushing a lighter brown color and thought it was done. But the green of the leaves was a bit too bright, so I added a brown wash using acrylic paint and some water. I like how the wash toned down the colors and added a little bit of a realistic curl to each of the leaves. For the next plant, I cut a classic leaf shape across one of the herringbone sections so it looks like veins on a leaf. I folded the leaf in half and cut long triangles to make a taper like I did on the Dracaena leaf. I left this long paper stem so it looks like a fern leaf. I like to conserve creative energy and save time, so for the rest of the leaves of the fern plant, I made simple straight cuts. I'm using this vintage wooden bead as the pot. I'm shoving the paper stems deep into the bead hole and securing them with white glue. This would have been easier to do before adding the leaves, but I added a central vein with a brown marker. I'm using some of the brown wash to add a shadow under the leaves and a bit in the center for depth. I think the detailed center leaf makes the whole plant look realistic, and you don't even notice the straight cut leaves are different. Next up, I'm making a hanging plant using this braided thread. I imitated the look of a woven basket by wrapping the braided thread around a plastic bottle cap, adding white glue as I went. The more trips around the bottle cap you make, the taller your basket will be. I stopped at 4. The white glue doesn't stick to the shiny cap, so it pops off easily. Instead of using the braided thread, I'm making life easier and using a single strand of squishy yarn to make the bottom. First, I added some glue to the bottom of the pot, and now I'm just shoving a coil of yarn on top of the glue. I'm creating this bottom on a tile so I can easily peel it off when it dries. You could also use glass, a dish, or wax paper. This simple basket came together so quickly and I love how it looks. To make the hanging part of the basket, I unbraided the end of the thread and tied a knot. I spaced the strings equally and glued them inside of the basket. I'm using this mystery dried plant that was given to me to make the hanging leaves. I'm making the vine I'm attaching the leaves to using a single strand of sewing thread covered in white glue. Off camera, I added extra white glue to help the pieces stick to the thread. Rather than fussing with a few pieces of shorter thread, I made one long vine I can chop up later. I'm mixing some glue into the dirt, which in this case is just coffee grounds. I scavenged a few used K-cups because the coffee inside is finely ground and it's perfect for miniature dirt. The flimsy sewing thread didn't want to go into the dirt, so I'm attaching the vine directly to the side of the basket with some hot glue. This would be a very long and dramatic hanging vine, but I'm giving it a trim so I can use the other pieces for the rest of the plant. I'd love to make some more vines like this and cover a miniature gazebo. I can't be the only one who has a bunch of wire nuts sitting around. I'm using my X-Acto saw blade to cut one in half. Now I have two teeny tiny pots. The first one to get a plant is the slightly larger pot, which is the top half of the wire nut. I'm modifying some of these tapered leaves I have left over from making the Dracaena plant. All of these leaves are pretty much the same size, so I'm going in every few leaves and cutting it shorter by cutting a new taper. Just like this. To make these long skinny leaves look like a spider plant, I'm creating a line down the center of each leaf with a white gel pen. The white looked really bright and unnatural, so I'm adding some watered down yellow ochre paint over top of it. These leaves are sticking straight up and have no movement, so I'm using the end of a paintbrush to give them a curl. I trimmed this longer piece into 3 sections so it's easier to work with. I used a paintbrush to mimic the curve inside of the pot and glued a couple pieces in place. Before adding the final piece, I'm gluing in this spacer. This is just a thin strip of cereal box I shaped around the end of a paintbrush. This helps create some separation between the outer leaves and the inner leaves. I'm disguising the edge of the cereal box so it blends in and looks like dirt. To create the center, I wrapped a third piece of paper completely around the end of a paintbrush and glued it in the middle on the inside of the paper circle. This entire plant was made with a small scrap piece, and it looks even fuller when you curl the leaves. The tiny scraps I created when I made the leaves shorter won't go to waste. I folded each of the little pieces in half and glued them together to make a tiny spider baby. Now that the glue is dry, I'm trimming and rounding the folded bottom so it looks more natural. I curled the leaves on the little spider baby and glued a piece of thread right in the center. Next up, I'm making a Monstera plant in the fastest, least tedious way I could come up with. Monstera plants have distinctive heart-shaped leaves with tiger stripe cutouts. I drew the Monstera leaf on a folded piece of paper so I can cut out 2 leaves at once. I cut out a few different pairs of Monstera leaves and modified the most distinctive features on some of the leaves so they would look a little bit different. For this leaf, I cut off this aggressive point on one of them. I gave each leaf a slight curve by tracing a vein pattern with my ball stylus from the Dollar Tree. I am attaching the Monstera leaves to a piece of green coated wire. I used some super glue to attach to the leaf and reinforced it with some more glue on the back. You could also use wood glue or white glue. To make the pot, I cut 4 trapezoids out of cereal box. I assembled the pieces on a smooth surface with a paper bottom. To give the pot some weight, I'm using these black aquarium rocks as filler. I have a wide variety of crafting materials, and like most of the stuff, I have no idea where these rocks came from. I'm giving the Monstera leaves a droopy look by curling them over a thick paintbrush. I only added 1 layer of rocks, so I have plenty of room for hot glue. I'm adding in small piles of hot glue and sticking in 2 or 3 leaves at a time before it can harden. I'm focusing on adding the shorter leaves to the outside of the pot and the taller leaves in the center. I covered up the hot glue and aquarium rock mess using some more coffee grounds. I initially planned to paint the cereal box pot, but instead I'm covering it up with this funky fabric. I lined up a straight cut at the top of the pot and left overhang on the sides and bottom. I trimmed all of the sides to be flush with the edge and left a flap at the bottom. I'm coating the entire fabric pot using Mod Podge. This will keep the fabric clean and help it cling to the pot over time. Since the leaves are glued to wires, you can reposition them as you like. I'm not finished making my own plants, but I want to show you how you can copy some from this miniature kit. The leaves I'll be using are from a half-scale Row Life kit. The first step involved gluing wire together to make this desk and chair. I found it really aggravating, so I never completed the kit. This is meant to make a floor plant, but I want mine to sit on a table. I won't be using this largest row of leaves to keep it in a small scale. I cut out this set of 3 leaves that gradually get smaller. I want 5 tapered leaves in total, so I'm cutting out 2 more of the top 2 leaves. To make them smaller, I'm cutting on the inside of the colored border. According to the kit instructions, these leaves are done, but I added a very simple detail that I end up loving. I'm using the large end of my Dollar Tree ball stylus to add a curve to the leaves. I cupped all of the leaves like this. To form this plant, I cut each set of leaves in half, one at a time, so I wouldn't get the sizes mixed up. I glued the biggest leaves across from one another. I turned to the stem 90 degrees and glued another set above them. I started with the largest pair of leaves for the bottom and gradually went smaller, finishing with the smallest pair at the top. This is the same green wire I used for the Monstera plant. It came included with this kit. I painted the smaller wire nut pot a combo of green and orange so the green leaves would stand out. To make plants from a kit, you can buy ready-made kits or print some files from Etsy. I'm using some of the paper I colored earlier to make a similar leaf design myself from scratch. I subdued my very bright green paper using some white paint. I folded this little square of paper in half so I can cut 2 identical leaves at the same time. If you don't have a foam pad, you can use the palm of your hand to shape the leaves. My handmade leaves have a very similar look to the kit, but I cut them all to be about the same size so I can get a different look for my plant. I glued these leaves on the opposite way with the cup facing up. I'm using this wooden bead as the pot. For a little bit of added realism, I'm coloring the center of the wooden bead with a brown marker to fake the look of dirt. To make it look like the top rim of the pot, I didn't color all the way to the edge. Changing the direction of the leaves made them look completely different. I got this plastic sprig of leaves from an old Christmas ornament that was broken. You could use it as is and it would add some nice texture and color to your dollhouse. I'm taking a semi-handmade approach and doing a few modifications. I painted some brown acrylic paint onto the leaves and then wet it and removed the excess. The brown paint is stuck in the center line on the leaves that you couldn't really see before. Now the leaves have more depth and realism. I got these cool wooden beads at my local dollhouse store in the clearance section. The flat round shape would make a great plant pot. You could certainly skip this step, but I wanted to fit more leaves into the center hole, so I made it a bit bigger with a cheap round file I got at Harbor Freight. To make the plastic plant more in scale, I trimmed the leaves off and left the large, bulky stem behind. I dry fitted all the leaves inside of the bead, turned it upside down, and added super glue from the bottom. The super glue is thin enough to get in between all of the leaves with no messy glue on top. When you're making minis from scratch, it's good to balance more complicated projects with smaller ones that only take 1 or 2 steps. I transformed a 1/12 scale dresser handle into a wall pocket by simply gluing on some forest moss. After adding the hanging vines to the side, I trimmed smaller pieces and piled them on top to hide the weird ends. For the other handle, I used clump foliage. You could stain or paint the handles, but I took the very simple route and left them unfinished. I'm using this colorful flocking to add some flowers. Last year, I bought a large lot of used dollhouse miniatures and found the flocking in a kit. The kit was from the 1980s and it was intended for making flowered hedges for a 1/12 scale dollhouse. I added some random spots of glue and dunked my little plant into the yellow and topped it off with a small amount of white to look like highlights or light flowers. Look how dirty my fingers are. I mean, look how cool this stone bead is. All I did was glue greenery to the top. This was so simple, but a plant like this would look great on a dollhouse windowsill or table. I'd love to know which plants are your favorites and whether you watch for entertainment and relaxation or if you make minis. Thank you for watching until the end. You're the real MVP.